Again, we've interviewed him twice already, and we're starting to think we should rename these tapes the Mike Mentzer Audiotape series. The thing is, of all the experts we've interviewed, we've gotten the best response from our tapes with Mike. People love hearing about his high-intensity workout, and let's face it, training information that we can start using immediately without buying any special equipment or supplements is pretty rare these days. How are you, Mike?
You see, if I were doing any better, it would be literally obscene.
How is that?
Well, this Mike Mentzer, Dorian Yates heavy-duty thing has proliferated in popularity until now. It's a groundswell that is literally phenomenal. In fact, only this morning, and it's only 9:30 Los Angeles time, I received 6 phone calls from individuals across the country who heard those two first audio tapes, tape number 1 and number 2 I did with Bill. People are still responding to those tapes with enormous enthusiasm, and I certainly do appreciate it.
Terrific. I'm glad we could help. Now listen, there's a chance that some of our listeners are new to the sport of bodybuilding, so could you please synopsize your view of training for them? Tall order, I know.
All right, that's a tall order. Let me approach it maybe what will seem a little bit obliquely.
Okay.
The vast majority of bodybuilders, TC, seem to have the idea that the purpose is to go into the gym like a macho dummy and see how many sets they can do or how long they can endure. A bodybuilding workout is not an endurance contest. There are other individuals who seem to have the idea that the purpose is to go into the gym and do merely less than what everybody else is doing. Since nobody else has the slightest clue as to what they're doing, to react blindly and uncritically to that and do merely less is arbitrary also. As I made the point on the last tape, there is no room in science for the arbitrary. The idea should be to go into the gym and intelligently perform precisely what nature requires in the way of imposing a training stress and in the right amounts. One of my favorite analogies here lately goes to medicine, in fact, anesthesiology. PC, if you were going to go into surgery tomorrow, you would very much want the anesthesiologist to infuse or inject your circulatory system with the key term here is precise amount of chemical compound required to induce a state of anesthesia. If you were being wheeled into the surgical suite on the stretcher and you overheard the anesthesiologist say something to the effect, pump them up, just like in bodybuilding. Pump them up, give them more. More anesthesia is better than less. You would jump off the stretcher and run out the door.
Damn right.
You wouldn't feel very good about that. Or, if you heard him say something slightly different like, let's infuse TC's circulatory system with a little bit less anesthesia than we gave that guy yesterday. We killed the poor bastard. Let's give TC a little bit less and see what happens. Now, here's the point. In this particular case where life and death is clearly an issue, it's very easy to see, of course, why scientific precision, again, dear listener, the key term is precision, why scientific precision is so very important. My point is that bodybuilders should take that principle from medical theory and apply it to bodybuilding theory. Again, the idea is not to go into the gym with the idea more is better or less is better. The idea is to go into the gym like an intelligent, rational, logical human being and perform the precise amount of exercise required. Any more than that is overtraining. Going back for a second to this parallel with medical theory, it's interesting. The first thing the medical researchers had to do, of course, was discover or identify the precise chemical compound that would serve to induce a state of anesthesia. Once they discovered that chemical compound, of course, they then had to find out precisely how much was needed. Going back to bodybuilding theory, where of course, we're still working with human physiology. In this case, we didn't have to discover a chemical compound to induce anesthesia. We had to discover the training stress that would serve to induce, similar use of terms, induce a state of muscular hypertrophy. Once the training stress was discovered, we then had to find out precisely, I can't emphasize the term enough, we had to discover precisely how much was required. And as it turns out, TC and dear listener, the amount of high-intensity training stress required to induce a strength and muscular size increase ain't nearly as much as many people have been led to believe or would like to believe. In fact, so many people are obsessing with the issue of volume, number of sets, literally obsessing, that they're failing to sit down, take the time, and consider the nature of one actual set of high-intensity training to failure. One set of barbell squats to failure, for instance, might be viewed as something akin to exposing your skin to 3 hours of intense sunlight. Stop obsessing with the idea of number one. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, the issue of volume, as Arthur Jones pointed out brilliantly years ago, the issue of volume, or number of sets, listener, is a negative. Let me state that again. This is perhaps one of the most important issues, TC, I can get across today. The issue of volume, once again, or number of sets, is a negative with a capital N. Whether you do one set, listener, or 100 sets. Insofar that you train at all, even one set is a negative. Insofar that you train at all, you're making an inroad into the body's recovery ability. And to the extent that you do that, you have that much less of your body's resources left over for overcompensation, which is growth. In other words, the more you train, the more of your body's energies and resources are used in the attempt to merely compensate for the exhaustive effects of the exercise, which is what recovery is. And less of that recovery ability is left over for overcompensation. So to underscore this, to summarize it again, the idea is to have the individual go into the gym and perform the precise amount of exercise required.
All right. Let me see if I can throw a curveball at you, and let's see if you can hit it out of the ballpark, okay?
I have no doubt about that one.
Okay, fair enough. Let's use medicine as an analogy again. There's Western medicine and there's Eastern medicine. They use a whole different approach.
There is reason and there is mysticism.
But there is
logic and there is irrationality.
Okay, what about physics? There are different theories of physics. We're searching for a unified theory. There's quantum physics, there's Einsteinian physics.
Now, you have to be careful here.
Okay.
I just wrote a lengthy paper on this entitled Mind Training. It's going to be published in Flex. And in fact, I talked about physics, believe it or not. You've got to be very careful.
Okay.
We still live in a semi-free country, TC, where people can print just about anything they damn well please, including physicists. And like other people, there are good physicists and bad physicists. I have heard all the garbage you're talking about.
Okay.
And it flows from the philosophy of irrationalism or mysticism. There is and can be only one valid theory of anything. First of all, you have to understand the term theory. A theory is a set of principles which purports to be either a correct description of some aspect of reality, like physics or bodybuilding, and or a guideline for successful human action. In other words, reality is the realm of the truth. There is only one reality, therefore there can only possibly be one correct description of any aspect of it. Yes, there are diverse opinions. There are those who are offering poorly considered opinions. There are other physicists offering carefully considered opinions. And there are a few, the ones you don't read about because they're not seeking public popularity publishing this garbage. There is and can be only one valid theory of physics.
Well, who is to say which of those theories is correct?
Anyone who is willing to take the time and exercise the required mental effort to learn the laws of logic and make a judgment for himself. Actually, no one individual is the final authority in intellectual matters or ethics or anything else. Reality is the ultimate arbiter. It is up to each individual, anyone who has concern with ideas in the realm of the intellect, to make a judgment for himself. What you're suggesting is that, well, actually in this particular case, you're becoming a little bit contentious. Well, who in the hell is Mike Mentzer to say these physicists are wrong? After all, he's only a bodybuilding trainer. If you recall from the last tape, I reported that we are living not merely in a dark age, but a black hole. One would not think that science would be involved in that, but in fact there is increasing evidence that science itself, including physics, is in the throes of a rapid process of intellectual disintegration. The idea here is you got to be very careful and not accept uncritically everything that's offered in print. When someone says that there are many theories and no one can be right, he's committing a logical fallacy known as the fallacy of self-exclusion. His own statement is a theory. The statement that there are no valid theories or only one valid theory is a theory in itself. It's a self-contradiction. Do you see that?
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it sure does. All right. But let me finish. I was just saying that if I ask you a question, it doesn't necessarily mean that I believe that way. I'm a reporter, an interviewer. I'm not allowed to have opinions. So I'm asking you things just so that you may, so we can just stir some conversation. Okay. Fair enough?
So be it.
Okay. All right. Good enough. You sent us a letter recently that said that there's evidence coming out of Texas that overtraining can actually be harmful to your health.
Well, in fact, I was going to bring that up myself. I have that letter to Bill Phillips sitting right here in front of me. If you'll indulge me, I'll read that letter.
Okay.
Listener, this is a letter I wrote to Bill Phillips on January the 11th. Indulge me here for about a minute or two. You'll find this letter most interesting.
Sure.
Dear Bill, a quick note to let you know that things are going very well. My articles apparently are extremely popular, as evidenced by the number of letters and phone calls I get. The majority are from agonizingly confused bodybuilders smart enough to understand my factually based, logical, non-contradictory philosophy. Many were even on the verge of giving up training entirely, frustrated after months and years of no progress. Most gratifying recently has been the increasing number of very well-educated individuals, including physicists, in fact, there, TC, chemical engineers, cardiac and neurosurgeons, et al., who find my articles very appealing. Many of them have called as a result of your still sending out those audio tapes we did. Thank you. I was quite excited the other day when during a news program they presented a piece on the recent research of the aerobic guru in Texas, Dr. Kenneth Cooper. After 2 years of doing just about everything I could within reason to alert bodybuilders and fitness enthusiasts about the dangers of overtraining, here comes along the famous Dr. Cooper stating some of the same things I have on the subject. As I have written and stated frequently, Cooper made it clear that overtraining is more than wasted effort. It is counterproductive. In fact, it is life-threatening. About 8 issues ago in Flex, I wrote in my column, and I quote myself here, while I don't have the hard evidence, it stands to reason that chronic, gross overtraining may very well have long-range medical implications, close quote. Now, here comes the well-respected Dr. Cooper stating that he has the evidence. He and his research colleagues have grown alarmed by the increasing incidence of serious diseases, including cancer and heart problems, among long-term bodybuilding and fitness enthusiasts, and they ascribe it most directly to overtraining. I have no doubt, as I stated on our previous tape, that overtraining is the single most serious problem in the field of athletic training, and no one else seems to notice or care. I had Sports Illustrated interested in an article on the subject. That article, along with what we're saying in the muscle magazines, and what massive attention Cooper is already getting on the subject, perhaps the issue will finally get the kind of attention it deserves. End of that.
Terrific. That's compelling stuff.
I've been doing everything, in fact, that I possibly could over the last 2 years at least to alert bodybuilders of the destructive influence of overtraining. No one else in the bodybuilding world picked up the gauntlet. Now here finally there's a Dr. Kenneth Cooper who some of the older listeners may remember from 20 years ago, the man who in fact popularized aerobic training in this country. He is saying, listener, that overtraining is not merely counterproductive in that it hampers your training progress. It is literally life-threatening. In his book, which I have here in front of me, he cites a number of case studies involving individuals among his many clients down there at his institute in Texas who started coming down with heart disease and cancer. So many, in fact, TC, that after a while he got alarmed. He was quite stymied by this initially. He couldn't figure it out. These were purists, if you will. Individuals who didn't drink, smoke, eat fat. They were running several days a week, even lifting weights, and all of a sudden they were getting heart attacks and cancer. He and his alarmed colleagues undertook a research program that finally yielded the answer: overtraining. And it's not hard to understand if you look at training as a form of physical stress, just like sunlight is. Sunlight is a form of physical stress on the body, just like exercise. Up to a very definite point in time, exposing your skin to high-intensity sunlight stress will yield you a positive force known as a suntan. Any slightest bit beyond that will result in a negative, a sunburn. Exercise is a form of intense physical stress on the body. Exposing your body to a high-intensity training stress up to a very definite point in time will yield you a positive too. Not a suntan buildup in this case, but a buildup of muscular mass as a defensive barrier against future assaults by that same physical stress. Now, most people regard getting a suntan or developing large muscles as purely cosmetic. However, nature did not have that in mind, of course. The buildup of a suntan or muscle mass beyond normal levels serve as protective barriers against intense physical stresses. But those barriers can be overwhelmed. The body does not have an infinite capacity for tolerating the destructive effects of intense physical stress. So again, if you look at exercise like a physical stress, what happens when you overexpose your skin to intense sunlight? You burn. One of my old friends who understands high-intensity training theory very well refers to overtraining as an exercise sunburn. The point here is you don't know what damage you're doing to your glandular system when you're chronically, grossly overtraining. You've got to be very, very careful. Again, not just in terms of how it will adversely affect your ongoing training progress, but your long-term health. It's a very serious issue, and I'm glad you brought that up, TT. It's again, not something that I have a weird emotional investment in, but I have come to identify overtraining as the single most crucially important issue in all of athletics. 99.9% of all athletes, including bodybuilders, and especially bodybuilders grossly overtrained, they all operate with the childlike, simplistic notion that if more jelly beans are better than less, well then by golly, it's obvious. More training must be better than less. But if you go back to childhood, in fact, you'll see that your conclusion was erroneous. More jelly beans ain't better than less. After a certain point, you get sick.
Okay.
The science of bodybuilding exercise is not infinitely complex, but my goodness, people, it's not so very simple where you can take a principle, more is better, from childhood and apply it to a very complex subject and expect meaningful results. There's more to the science of exercise than the principle more is better. And as I stated earlier, more is not better. Less is not better. In fact, as Jones pointed out once again, the issue of volume, number of sets, is a decided negative. Even one set is a negative. Insofar that you train at all, you're making an inroad into recovery ability. But of course, you have to do at least one set to stimulate growth. Anything beyond that will lead to overtraining.
All right, let's get a little specific again for some of the readers, some of the listeners who aren't familiar with you or are new to us. Take me, for example, give me a leg workout, for instance, that represents your principles.
A leg workout?
Yeah, just for example, just so people would understand better what we're talking about.
My average in the gym client, as well as my 50 or 60 phone consultation clients, are all doing essentially the same leg workout. They start out with a set of leg extensions to failure, 6 to 10 reps, and then immediately with no rest proceed to either a leg press or squat in superset fashion, 6 to 10 reps to failure. Once they have completed the superset, they can take a brief rest. I tell them to go get a drink of water, walk around the gym, stare at some of those girls clad in thongs and bikinis to get your testosterone levels up. Then they come back and do a set of leg curls, take another brief rest, then do one set of calf raises. Now, here more recently, I'm employing a different principle, which is going to get your readers very excited. I was hesitating on whether or not I should dispense this information on this audio tape because this information is literally of stunning value. Can't even put a price tag on it for those who are really interested in bodybuilding. What I have come to discover, TC, Bill Phillips, John Balick, Joe Weider, dear listener, and everybody who cares about optimal progress, is that we've all been wasting our time lifting weights.
Come again? What do you mean?
In this country, it's a tradition, of course, to call this thing weightlifting. But remember, I said a little bit earlier, there's no room in science for the arbitrary or the traditional. We used to have this thing called weightlifting contests. When young guys would want to train, they would say, hey, let's go to the YMCA and lift weights. I have come to discover that lifting weights is a waste of time. In fact, dear listener, you would do much better to start holding the weights in the contracted position, only doing the lowering of the weight. Let me give you the rationale. The positive portion of any exercise, the lifting of the weight, is the least productive in terms of stimulating an increase. Why? Because it's the weakest part of the movement. You cannot lift nearly as much weight as you can hold and you can't hold as much weight as you can lower. On top of that, the positive, or the lifting of the weight, is a negative in that it is the one portion of the exercise that makes the deepest inroad into recovery ability. That is a negative. What I've been having my clients doing is holding the weights in the fully contracted position for up to 15 seconds, and then once they recognize their static strength is about to go, they start lowering the weight very slowly. And the results I'm achieving are literally phenomenal. The purpose of a bodybuilder is not to lift merely heavy weights. That's a power lifter's purpose. Let me reemphasize that. As a bodybuilder, dear listener, your primary goal is not to lift heavy weights, but to achieve high intensity or maximum contractions of the muscle. Obviously, the only place that you can achieve a maximum contraction would be in the fully contracted position. That is the only position of the exercise where 100% of the muscular bulk can be activated. So here's the idea. Let's eliminate the positive. It doesn't contribute much to growth stimulation. Beyond that, it's even more negative, again, in that it makes a deep inroad into recovery ability. Start holding your weights in the contracted position, at least in those exercises where you have resistance in the contracted position, and then lower. Let's go back to the leg training. With my clients, I had been putting a heavier weight than normal on the leg extension machine, a weight considerably heavier than they can handle for 6 to 10 reps to failure. I help them into the straight leg contracted position, and they hold it there for as long as they can, literally, until they give me a signal that their static or holding ability is about to go out. And then I emphasize, now start to lower it very slowly under control. Then when they reach the bottom of the negative movement, I tell them to shake their hands out, take a deep breath, reset psychologically, and let's do one more. I just had a very clear example of the success of this last week. I had one client start up with me 3.5 months ago. He couldn't do the whole stack on the leg extension for even one rep. I forget what he started out with, but after 2 months, he was up to the whole stack for 14 reps. Then he hit a sticking point. He couldn't go beyond 14 reps for 3 workouts. This was when I started working with the idea of static contracted holds and lowerings. For 2 or 3 workouts in a row, all he did was hold a very heavy weight in the straight leg position and lowered it, doing it 2 times in that fashion as I described. The next workout, we went back to see if there was a carryover to the positive strength, and his leg extensions went up to 20 reps. That's a phenomenal improvement, and I'm seeing this with many other people. I've been using it most successfully on the pull-downs. You can do it there because, obviously, once you get into the contracted position, there is significant resistance. You have to fight to hold it there. What I do is put a little bit heavier weight than they might use again for 6 to 10 to failure. I help them pull the bar down into the clavicles, which is the fully contracted position. They'll hold it, in this case, for about 6 to 8 seconds. Again, until the static strength starts to go, then they will lower it. It's interesting. I had one kid say, well, how come your clients are only doing, in some cases, 1 rep or 2 reps? And I say, well, look, if you count the number of seconds that they're working, it's just as long, if not longer than 1 set. But we've eliminated the least productive part of the movement and are focusing on the more productive part of the movement. Remember here, listener, as a bodybuilder, your primary concern is not to lift heavy weights. That's the purpose of a power lifter or Olympic lifter. As a bodybuilder, your primary consideration, your overriding concern should be to achieve high-intensity muscular contractions. On a deeper, more scientific, technical level, the science of bodybuilding exercise revolves around the issue of muscular contractions. The only position where you can achieve a full contraction is in the fully contracted position. For instance, at the top of a curl. That's the fully contracted position. At the top position of a leg extension. For the tricep, it would be when the arm is fully straightened and the elbow locked. Now, the problem the listener is going to have is finding exercises in his gym that will enable him to do this. Now, most gyms do have leg extension machines and pull-down machines. Fortunately, over here at Gold's Gym in Venice, California, where I train people personally, we also have a full complement of Nautilus machines, all of which provide resistance in the contracted position. But don't worry about it too much. Do it where you can. Try it with the pull-downs, the leg extensions. See what happens. Or you can come out to Gold's Gym here, and I'll put you through a few workouts. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is literally one of the most stunning discoveries in recent bodybuilding science. Just because we call this thing weightlifting, it's not cast in stone that you just lift weights. In fact, most bodybuilders, knowing nothing about this, they don't even do the positive or the lifting properly. They throw the weight, and then once they reach the contracted position, they immediately let it flop back down, not emphasizing either the contracted position or the negative. They're severely limiting themselves. Your muscles, remember, listener, have three levels of strength: the positive or the lifting, the static strength, which is your holding ability, and the negative. If you only work one level of your three levels of strength, do you see where it only stands to reason where you're not going to achieve full muscular development? Where is it cast in stone that you should only lift weights? It's a tradition. And again, if you want to take a truly scientific approach to this thing, you've got to reject tradition, or at least question it.
You mentioned that genetically, some people need longer recovery time, correct?
Well, sure, obviously, just as there are those individuals who do not tolerate exposure to high-intensity sunlight stress as well as others, with Scandinavians and albinos at one extreme who tolerate literally almost no exposure to high-intensity sunlight stress. And now here's an important part, TC. Perhaps more important, you've got everything in between. Now, it's a very interesting issue you bring up here. Maybe I can best explain it this way. Only if there was a God would he have the luxury of being able to look inside of your body, read your genetic material, your DNA, and be able to tell you with absolute certainty, thou shalt perform exactly 5 sets per workout every 76 hours, sir. Any more, any less will compromise your progress. Now, I've never pretended to be God. I can't guarantee those who call me or buy my books that I would start you out on the same baseline program that God Almighty would, although I'm not so sure it ain't the same program. All I can do as an informed and a highly experienced trainer is get an individual started out on a baseline program, I call it, one that works quite well for those with at least average recovery ability. Then they get to call me back every 2 weeks or so I can help them monitor their progress and deem whether or not it's satisfactory. If I deem it's not satisfactory, then I recommend certain modifications. Another way to look at it. Let's say, TC, that you were a sun tanning coach, if there were such a ridiculous thing, and you had 50 clients under your charge. Would you bring them all out into the intense August sunlight at the equator for 2 hours the first time?
No.
No. You might burn some of them to death. There is a wide range of variation with individuals in regard to sunlight stress tolerance. However, that does not contradict the fact that in every case the presence of the sun is required. The theory of sun tanning does not change. Nature does require the presence of the sun. Back to exercise. Just because there are those individuals who do not tolerate high-intensity exercise stress as well as others, does not contradict the fact that high-intensity training stress is an absolute requirement for inducing growth. The variation comes in with how much exercise stress any given individual can tolerate. As I made the point on the first tape, I've got some clients only doing 3 sets once a week. These might be viewed as the equivalent of albinos or Scandinavians with regards to sunlight stress tolerance. If you look at it that way, it's not so hard to understand. You'll be less incredulous. Now, most bodybuilders, knowing nothing about this, they'll run to their local newsstand every month, grab up a bunch of magazines, run home, riffle through the pages at random, pick out an arbitrary training program and stick to it slavishly for 2 years, and of course make little or no progress unless they're super genetic freaks taking a lot of steroids. And of course most of us are not that way. After 2 years, they'll either give up or just continue going to the gym, having lost their fire just as a habit or a social ritual. The science of exercise is not infinitely complex, as I said before, but it's not that simple either. There's another point here. Let's say that a listener calls me or buys my book and starts out on that baseline program, and it does work quite well from the beginning. It's also true, now this is very, very important. Very few bodybuilders understand this point, and it's of extreme importance. Let's say the program does work quite well from the beginning. It's also true that as each week passes, he continues to grow larger and stronger, lift progressively heavier weights. Of course, as the weights grow progressively greater, the demands on the body too grow progressively greater until finally, unless he does certain things to compensate for it, and this is the hard part, until finally he'll be so darn strong, the weights he'll be lifting will be so heavy, given the particular volume and frequency protocol he's on, the demands themselves will reach a critical point and they'll constitute overtraining. When that happens, you will experience what we all commonly refer to as a sticking point or a plateau. Now, there was a time up until recently, TC, when I thought that this was inevitable. In fact, I used to tell my phone consultation clients, okay, take this program, stay with it for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks until it stops working. When that happens, call me back and we'll make some adjustments. Now I realize I made a grave mistake. I could have avoided that mistake if I would have kept in mind the very thing or phenomena I just explained, that as you grow stronger week to week, the demands grow greater. If you don't compensate for those increasing demands by doing certain things, you will inevitably reach a sticking point. Keep that in mind, that as you're getting stronger week to week, the demands are growing greater. And compensate for it by periodically inserting extra rest days, eliminating certain exercises. You don't have to reach a sticking point. When you're in possession of a valid theory and you're making the proper application, you should start making progress immediately from the time you start training and uninterrupted, continuously until you reach the upper limits of your physical potential. Now, several years ago, Arthur Jones made the statement that from the time an individual starts training, he should be able to reach the upper limits of his muscular potential in 2 years, and now I realize he was grossly wrong. You should be able to reach the upper limits of your potential in 6 to 12 months. I have pointed this out to several people, and they became incredulous immediately. And I say, now hold on a second. If you were to find yourself in the jungle tomorrow and you happened upon a voodoo witch doctor, he would probably have about a 0% success rate with his patients. Then all of a sudden you introduce to him these miracles called antibiotics, aspirin, sterile bandages. His success rate literally skyrockets off the charts. He thinks you're either God or the devil. We have this wonderful thing in Western civilization called theoretical knowledge. The purpose of a theory, again, is to serve as a guideline for successful human action. If any of the listeners are are doubtful that it's possible to reach the upper limits of your muscular potential in 1 year or less, I'll give you another analogy. If NASA, the Space Administration, can send a man to the moon and bring him back safely every time, and they have, don't tell me we can't succeed with each and every one of our missions to the gym here on Earth in a spectacular fashion as well.
Okay. All right.
Sending a man to the moon requires the application of theoretical knowledge from physics, astronomy, electronics, engineering, medicine, biology. Building muscles should be a cakewalk compared to a moonwalk.
Okay.
Don't tell me we can't succeed with every one of our missions to the gym here on Earth if they can send a man to the moon and bring him back safely each time.
Now, in your previous tapes, you've told people not to accept things blindly. So I have to ask you certain questions that people might ask, okay? Now, genetically, you've said that some people need longer recovery time.
Yes, they do.
But could it not be said that some people genetically need more of a workload?
No, not more of a work. See, I think your use of terms here is a little bit confusing.
Okay.
You're confusing. Well, actually, you did use the word more of a workload.
Yes.
No, now this is a typical mistake, TC, and I hear it all the time.
Okay.
The reason people continue to ask that question is this. They have failed to understand what the specific stimulus is in the first place that serves to trigger the growth machinery into motion. If you were able to curl 120 pounds for 10 reps and you couldn't do 11, the first rep of that set would be the easiest, requiring maybe 10% intensity of effort. That first rep would fatigue you a little bit. The second rep, therefore, would be a little bit harder, whereas the first rep may require on the order of 8 to 12% intensity of effort. The second rep may require 30% intensity of effort. The second rep fatigues you even further, of course, and the third rep is harder still, and so it goes with each successive rep of the set. Each one grows progressively harder than the preceding, until finally we get to that last possible rep, the 10th one in this case, where you're trying as hard as you can, you're gritting your teeth, you're shaking all over, you're exerting yourself maximally, and you're barely able to complete the rep. Which rep do you think obviously would be the most productive in terms of stimulating an increase in strength and size, TC?
Well, the last one, of course.
If you could curl 120 pounds for 10 reps and you only did one rep, you think you'd ever grow?
No.
If you could curl 120 pounds for 10 reps and you only ever did 6, do you think you'd ever grow?
No.
So what is the stimulus? What is the workload that serves to induce muscular hypertrophy? It's the last rep of a set carried to failure.
Okay.
This is the important point. Sometimes I get phone consultation clients calling me back in 2 weeks saying, "Oh, gee, Mike, they're actually quite anxious. They think I'm going to get angry and reach through the phone and wring their neck." They'll say, "Mike, I tried to stay to the program, but I gave in to that temptation. I did one set. I wanted to do another set so bad. I just felt like I needed another set." And I said to him, "Well, sir, you used the word felt. What did you feel?" And he couldn't identify the feeling. The feeling, in fact, was fear and uncertainty. We didn't send men to the moon based on vague feelings. If you don't use your theoretical knowledge and apply it with 100% consistency, listener, you're never going to achieve bodybuilding success. Yes, I told him, of course you felt like you could do another set. In fact, if I stuck a shotgun up your butt, you'd be here in the gym for 3 days training nonstop. A bodybuilding workout is not an endurance contest. Then I pointed out, look, the specific stimulus that triggers the growth machinery into motion is that last rep of a set carried to failure. And beyond that, once you have achieved growth stimulation on that last rep, you don't have to do it again. This is the fallacy. This is the mistake.
All right, let me bring in a quote from a third party here. Are you familiar with Charles Poliquin? He's an Olympic strength coach.
What's his name?
Charles Poliquin. He's a Canadian strength coach. He's coached.
It rings the bell.
Okay. Well, he had this to say regarding high-intensity training. He says he doubts that it works as a year-in, year-out training method. He says that strength gains are correlated with total motor unit activation And he doesn't think one set to failure training will get you to recruit all the motor units available.
Well, actually, I've got a response to that here.
Okay.
In fact, it's from one of your listeners, TC, or not listeners, but readers.
Okay.
Bill Phillips took the time last week to send me a couple letters from your readers in response to the stuff in your magazine about me. Can I read this to you quickly?
Sure.
Dear Bill, I have just renewed my subscription to Muscle Media 2000, and I am presently recovering from a heavy-duty workout. Yes, Mentzer's hot. However, I am not writing this letter to give Mentzer praise. I am writing this letter to thank him for saving my life. Overtraining was literally killing me. At best, my yearly gains were marginal, and I was constantly plagued by fatigue, minor injuries, and flu-like symptoms. I attempted to induce gains by adding calories, but I only got fat. So I looked worse. Heavy-duty training was my last resort. I figured that I might as well give it a shot since I had nothing to lose. Hell, I didn't gain from what I was doing anyway. To make a long story short, intense heavy-duty training works. It's brief, effective, and it doesn't fry your nervous system. Thanks again, and tell Mike to keep up the good work. Yours very truly, Sean Jones. P.S. This is the point. P.S. If people doubt the effectiveness of Mentzer's theories, maybe they can talk to one of his most famous trainees. You know, Dorian, what's his name? When people bring up a hypothetical objection to high-intensity training, stating it cannot or does not work, I become a little bit bored by those people. You know, we have this thing called reality and evidence. It worked for Dorian Yates, Aaron Baker, David Dirth, David Paul, Mike Mentzer, Roland Kickinger, and an untold number of thousands and thousands of others. It does work. Yes, it does build strength, but that is a prerequisite for building size. Remember back in high school, TC, either you or one of your friends had a broken arm. They put it in a cast. After 3 or 4 weeks, they take the cast off, and the first thing you notice is your arm shriveled up, the muscle atrophied. What is the first thing the physical therapist does to build up the muscle? He gives you strength training exercises, for Christ's sake. If you want to get bigger, you got to get stronger. Yes, heavy-duty training is essentially a strength training program, but you cannot get bigger without getting stronger. When a muscle atrophies, it gets weaker. When it hypertrophies, it gets stronger. There is a relationship between strength and size.
Okay, great.
Is that sufficient answer?
Sure, okay. Let's get a little bit more simplistic here. What are your views regarding like free weights compared to machines? Do you have any preferences? Is it necessary to use free weights always?
If you were to believe the manufacturers of free weights, TC, you would have the idea that mankind has benefited enormously in every aspect of his life due to scientific technology and mechanization, in every aspect of his existence except bodybuilding. Now here's the most important point perhaps. Again, TC and dear listener, as a bodybuilder, obviously your primary goal is not merely to handle heavy weights, once again, as I said before, but to achieve high-intensity muscular contractions. When you're doing an incline press with a free bar, for instance, TC, a certain significant portion of your focus and effort is diverted away from moving the resistance towards the problems of balance and coordination. And to the extent that your attention is diverted from the resistance towards the problems of balance and coordination, you make the exercise that much less effective in terms of achieving a high-intensity muscular contraction. I have my in-the-gym clients use a guided mechanism, an incline press machine or a Smith machine, so that none of their energy, effort, or focus is wasted even slightly towards the problems of balance and coordination. In other words, all of their effort is directed merely against the resistance so they can achieve a maximum contraction of the muscle. That's the best answer by far. No one can possibly refute the validity of that statement.
Okay.
Well, they can refute it, but it will not be. It won't work.
All right.
I don't. It's really a very interesting thing. We did have this thing called the Industrial Revolution, which followed from the Enlightenment. It's one of the things that makes our country and Western civilization so superior to the rest of the world. And yet bodybuilders seem to forget that. Yes, I love machines. I love my car. I love my electric lights. I love my video, my 50-inch TV, hot and cold running water. I love the dentist and his drill. I love the surgeon and his tools.
Okay. All right.
Where would you rather live? In the United States of America, where we have all of these wonderful creature comforts, or in India, where people are still walking around starving and dying at the age of 13 due to dehydration because they reject Western science?
Point well taken. Okay. Do you train your abs and calves in the same manner? Do they respond the same way to high-intensity training?
Exactly. Especially with regards to the abs. A lot of people are obsessed with training their abs. They think that performing endless numbers of sit-ups will somehow whittle away the fat on the abs, which of course is ridiculous. There is no such thing, listener, as a localized fat loss. And you cannot achieve even generalized fat loss by exercise alone. The losing of body fat is contingent primarily upon calories. If you're consuming less calories than you need for maintenance, your body will be forced to revert to its fat stores for energy. And over a period of time, you will see fat lost from all areas of the body, including the abs. And beyond that, the abdominals, understand, are skeletal muscles, just like your pectorals, your latissimus, your biceps, your triceps. Therefore, they respond to the same type of stimulus. High-intensity training in little amounts. Now, the old saying that the calves are stubborn because we run, we walk, we climb stairs, therefore they need more work, is the most ridiculous argument of all. If overtraining is the problem, how can overtraining be the solution? What the calves require is not more work, TC, but a radically different type of work. A radical departure in the type of activity they're commonly exposed to. They need very, very intense, heavy training. And because they're already overtrained, you got to be very careful. The calves require less work than every other body part, not more. In other words, if overtraining is the problem, and you're suggesting more training is the solution, that's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Okay.
There are people who will try it. There are people who will try it. As Arthur Jones said years ago, Mike, don't ask me to explain the actions of irrational people. You can't explain irrationality of that sort. Some people are just so stupid they've never learned anything even slightly about the nature of knowledge, logic, or its application. There are those people for whom you can draw a picture on a wall that a blind man or an idiot can see, but this poor son of a bitch just turns his head.
Okay.
In fact, Dorian Yates and I, whenever Dorian Yates comes over here and I train him, we go out to dinner, we chuckle. He says, Mike, when are these guys going to realize that we're over here holding up the light and that it truly is the light? Why do they continue to insist in crawling backwards towards the darkness? Then I told him what Arthur Jones says, Dorian, if I could explain the actions of irrational people, they wouldn't be irrational.
All right.
Some people just don't value logic. For some people, the argument that 2 and 2 was 4 just goes right over their head. They would rather be off over here going to a dance party at the nightclub or snorting cocaine or watching the same rerun of Laverne and Shirley for the 58th time rather than pick up a philosophy book by Ayn Rand and learn how to think.
Okay. You've never discussed diet in bodybuilding. Maybe that's because we haven't asked you, but I get the idea that you think diet is a little bit overrated.
Well, it's not overrated. There are certain aspects of it that are inordinately emphasized. Actually, this is a very interesting one. As much confusion as there does exist on the subject of training, and we all know it's enormous, the subject of nutrition is even more confusing for most people. But in fact, and most interesting, The subject of nutrition is actually very simple, and I am not seeking to oversimplify it even slightly. I am not seeking to oversimplify it even slightly, listener, when I say that with regards to nutrition, all you really have to be concerned with is in making a reasonable effort on a daily basis to obtain a well-balanced diet. A well-balanced diet, by definition, is one that provides your body with all the nutrients it needs. Let me restate that. A well-balanced diet, by definition, is one that provides your body with all the nutrients it needs. Now let's focus on the key concept there, need or needs. It is a term that reverberates throughout the entire realm of biology. If you've ever studied biology, sociology, psychology, you've come across the word need and how important a role it plays. A very important aspect of biology, of crucial concern to all those listening, of course, is nutrition. The concept of need in the context of nutrition implies a limit that cannot be transcended. Let's say, for instance, TC, you need 25 milligrams of vitamin C. And that's true according to all of your reputable, and I emphasize the word reputable, according to all of your reputable nutritional scientists, all you need is 25 milligrams of vitamin C a day. Now, let's say all of a sudden you start taking a vitamin C supplement that provides you with as much as 3,000 milligrams a day. That will not force your body to utilize even one more milligram than it needs, or 26. Again, in the context of nutrition, the concept of need implies a limit that cannot be transcended. Now, when you drink more water than you need, you obviously just excrete it. You do not have that same luxury with proteins, fats, and carbs because they contain calories. What happens when you consume